What you gonna do with that
deserto?
do what dee da dee da dee da do what do da dee da do da do what do da dee da do
Brendon, we normally go entree main dessert for our show, but we're going to go dessert a little early, so then that way we don't make you hang around for longer than you need to.
No problem.
So we have got a sponsor. We're lucky enough that we get some Pilk ice cream for our podcast or our shows, which is basically it's
Plant-based.
a plant-based ice cream. It's bloody delicious. We've had it for a couple of weeks in a row now, and hopefully it gets up to Queensland soon. I think it's only just hitting the market at the moment in New South Wales. So highly recommend, and we'll have to try and get Alex to send some out. He's been pretty good in the past with sending these kind of things out to some of our guests. So surely that's got to hit your shelf as well, and you can have a taste.
We'll push him. We'll make sure he does it.
I'll do so. Yeah. I like the plant-based stuff. I'm all for it.
So, mate, for dessert, you mentioned the efficiency ratings of the teams in Super Rugby AU and Aotaeroa. You've got some graphics for us and some numbers as well. Do you want to take us through what you've done?
Right, yeah. So will you be seeing my screen at this stage?
We will be, yes.
I hope so. Not yet.
Right. Can you see it?
No. Have you gone down to share screen there?
I just see quickly. Oh, there we go. Desktop. All right, let's have a look. All right, you see me now?
Perfect. Yep.
All right, so yeah, there we see just the efficiency ratings after these 3 rounds. Now, obviously, who was at the Force and the Rebels have only played 2 games, but we can already start reading some stuff into it. Now, I just wanted to explain how this attack and defense efficiency works. So every single attack that you have, say it's a scrum in your own 22, doesn't matter what time of the game really at this stage, but you start that scrum. Now I'm looking at when that scrum finishes, have you gained territory? Have you retained possession? Have you scored points? And all of that, whatever you've achieved or not achieved, how many phases did you use to achieve that? So the best play that you can have is gaining territory. So you run, say, from your opponent 50 over the line, you score points, you score a 7-pointer because you convert the kick, and you do so in 1 phase. So if you score a try, sometimes using 11 phases, it will be slightly less efficient than doing so off phase 1. So if we count every single attack that you have in a game or defensive platform, we can now rack up your efficiency in every one and then calculate an efficiency overall per game. So what that allows us to do, just similar to what you guys do with players, the naked eye can't see everything. We seem to focus on players who have, who score tries or who do things that are flashy, that catches the eye. And it's similar with teams. We'd think a team would be poor at something or good at something else. But if you look at efficiency, you're actually sitting back and measuring every single aspect of their play to get a better understanding of their form. So we look at the attack efficiency, and then the offense efficiency is just the mirror image of that. So how you prevent your opponent from being efficient on attack, basically. And now when it comes to the balance, it's really important. As soon as you go over 50 balance, it means you're in form, because your attack and your defense balance each other out. You go above 50%. And as soon as you're below that, you're not in form. So it's as simple as that. When we get to round 6 or 7, this becomes really valuable in understanding who are likely to win certain games. So last year, for example, the Rebels beat the Brumbies. And at that stage, the Rebels did show a higher efficiency. In fact, all of last year, they were really efficient. The Reds were not that efficient, but what the Reds do is they hijack outcomes. And it's because of the way they play. They can do 9 crappy things, but do 1 really good thing, score 7 points off it. And, that'll reflect a fairly average efficiency, but their conversion of opportunities to points will be high. So they're a funny team to study. But if we now look at Australia so far, for me, it makes perfect sense looking at the Rebels. And it's because their defense is so strong. And on attack, they've learned how to score points. They don't muck about. They're in the 50. They have Hodge on the team. Anywhere within the opponent 50, he takes the 3 points. Happy days. So are they going to be able to score 5-pointers and 7-pointers at some stage? That remains to be seen. But step number one for any team to be efficient is learn how to make points. We see in Europe now at the moment, Italy make really good play, but they just do not know how to accumulate points. They kick every line out into the 22 for a penalty, for a line out, having scored no points of it within the last 2 years. So I don't know if their analyst is just thinking today is the day, today is the day. Plato says it's not going to be the day ever, but today is the day. So it's like they override science.
Yep.
I always kind of laugh at it to think, imagine doctors had to act like coaches do. Yes, the science says this, but I actually think I'm going to cut you open with a day today.
It'll work eventually.
Yeah. All right. So we look at the Brumbies, to be expected quite high. Waratahs to be expected quite low. And the main problem with the Waratahs being that defense is incredibly low. 25 for an attack is actually quite high. It's not the end of the world. People win a lot of games with attack on 25.
Yep.
But as soon as the defense dips below 70, you're in big trouble. All right, so the force we will look at, and then the Reds are kind of a mixed bag. So the Reds are not totally atrocious, and I think that's a lot to do with James O'Connor from last year. Remember, it was kind of here or there whether he would be the 10. They played Hegarty. They weren't sure who the 10 was going to be, and then suddenly they settled on him. And at the same time, he said, look, I'm now taking the kicks. I'm taking full ownership of this. And the Reds literally turned from that day. So he now makes the kicks in his own 50. He doesn't allow the Reds to run a million times. He plays a territory game. He sometimes takes the 3 when it needs to be taken, and that has really catapulted them up to the spot where they are now. And the other good thing about them, because they make so much play, they get better at it.
Yep.
So the players who play for the Reds, the Wilsons, the McRaiths, all these guys, even at international level, are going to be really good passing the ball around, offload game, whereas the guys from the strategic teams, the Rebels and so on and so forth, might take a bit longer to adapt. All right, so that is just Super Rugby AU, and if we then look at the Aotearoa guys, it's very early days, only 2 rounds, 2 teams have only played 1 game. To be expected, the Crusaders, very high, but shocking, the Chiefs are second so far. So I thought that performance was really average, but this is where it gets exciting. We can see their defense is atrocious, but look at that attack. So when we look at Super Rugby AU, we have both those teams, Force and the Waratahs, quite a bit lower than the Chiefs. So they're sitting pretty. But now finally we get to comparing the two, and I'm not going to get people excited because it's far too early to say. But if you look at attack efficiency, the Crusaders on 28.4, Chiefs the highest on 30.7, and then you come over to our guys, and all of a sudden you see our top 3 teams are playing better attacking or more efficient attacking rugby, while our defense stats are also really high. So we could say, but they are playing against Aussie sides, and the Aussie sides are supposed to be weaker. My data doesn't show that at this stage. It shows that the Australian teams, in fact, have a higher defense efficiency. And I think that has a lot to do with what happens at the breakdown. It's contested heavily. We do not give each other clean possession. I think the Aussie teams, I'm fairly new to it, having only arrived on these shores 2 years ago, but I think they really hate each other. They have that look about them. Whereas the Kiwi teams let each other play rugby. So that for me is fascinating, but it's early days.
So, Brendon, can you explain on the Super Rugby Aotearoa, the New Zealand sides have poor attack, but they also have, relatively speaking, pretty poor defence, with the exception of the Crusaders. How is it that the teams are showing, like I would have thought that if your attack was good, your defence was bad, or if your defence was bad, your attack was good across the competition. Can you explain that?
Yeah, look, you can have an inefficient attack or an inefficient defense for a few games, but not let in too many scores. So again, efficiency works on how often you are scored against, but that scored against can be 3-pointers, and sometimes it can be 5-pointers, and sometimes it can be 7-pointers. When we look at the percentage of times you concede points, it might be quite low or it might be high, and yet not take into consideration what kind of points were scored against you. So how many points were scored against you. What this shows us at this stage, their defense being poor, is that too many phases are being played against them. That's essentially what it comes down to.
Right.
So their opponents make territory easily. They find it hard to regather possession when they are defending. They take too many phases to regather possession when they are defending. So that's why I mean with the Australian breakdown seeming to be a lot tenser, we do not allow each other a meter. There's a lot of aggression. You see in the Australian derbies as well. There's quite a bit of fisticuffs, threatening to break out the whole time, and most of it is around that aggression in the breakdown. We don't know where that's going to end. If some teams are going to end up really slipping up, at the start of a season, everyone seems to be quite square, and then some guys really pull away. Well, it is already remarkable that both on attack and defense, the Australian sides are posting higher efficiency. So good news.
The takeaway from me is that if I'm looking at the balance of stats, but all the Rebels, Brumbies, and Reds all outscore the Crusaders. So logically, you're saying that the Australian sides are going to clean up in Trans-Tasman.
Hopefully.
Yeah, unfortunately, when we look at the Rebels, and I know you're only joking, but we look at the Rebels, they do convert a lot of opportunity to points. But at this stage, those are 3-pointers.
Yeah.
And the Crusaders might only convert, I think they're only converting 7% of all their attacks into points at the moment, but those 7% happen to be about 5.8 points because it's mostly unconverted or converted tries that they score. So that is a little disclaimer that has to come in at this stage. But the good news is at the start of a season, you first have to become efficient. Like the Rebels, they've learned how to score points. Now they have that comfort. They've played with a really good territory IQ for a long time, so they've always dominated territory. Now they've converted that into points. So the next thing would be, pile that scoreboard pressure on. We saw in the game against the Brumbies now, unfortunately, they went for 3 lineouts. 3 of their penalties they kicked to the Brumbies 22, and that yielded 0 points. So again, Hodge and Tumua, they now owe the data gods 9 points for letting that slip up. But, obviously as a team, they want to evolve and they want to get that line out try, that fool's gold that I talk about. Everyone just wants to bite that cherry. And then, you can forgive them for it because it's an emotional game and they really want to, get that high. But when you come back to data over a long run, there's enough evidence that it doesn't work.
Yep.
But so we'll see soon. We will see soon where they're going to move. As soon as the Rebels score a 5-pointer, it doesn't matter when it is, but you guys will see me kind of jump up and down. I hope it's a spectacular try from one of those 11 line breaks or whatever they had over the weekend, because they're an exciting team and it's great for Australian rugby that they are pumping.
Yeah, it's really good to see those stats there because, that gives us something to really be excited about for them. And I'm really intrigued to see how that evolves over the season. And, from our perspective, it's interesting to see how this will translate into fantasy points for these teams, especially, teams with good attack against or efficient attack against teams with, poorer defense efficiencies. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward. Last thing I really wanted to do before you left, we put out a few posts on the socials to see if anyone had any questions to ask you. The first question that we had here was from a friend of the pod, the Rugby Fixation podcast. If you haven't listened to their podcast, they're a really good podcast as well. The question is, what is it specifically about the Crusaders pack that makes them so good at scoring off lineouts, but also prevents other teams from scoring rolling maws tries against them? So I think you touched on a little bit before, but did you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think it's just muscle memory, to be honest. obviously in this day and age, analytics goes a long way. We know the top international teams always had a lock who had a big passion for studying opponents. So South Africa had Victor Matfield, England had Martin Johnson. Um, some teams seem to have them and other teams seems to not. So I wouldn't be surprised if Whitelock and these guys are really doing an awful lot of homework every single week on it. You know, you can't just rely on your team analysts to be studying your opponents. And not only the analytics beforehand, they look at a lot of cues during games. So they'd be studying what the hooker does with his feet prior to throwing in. Does he scratch his nose? Does he touch his ear? There's all these little cues that these guys study intensely. And again, some teams have really competitive locks who want to monster their opponents, but when it comes to the computer works afterwards, they're just not that big into it. They're just not that analytical. And I just think that the Crusaders have an incredibly professional mindset. So that would not even be coming from the coaches. That would come from players themselves taking ownership of that analysis.
Leadership group.
That's right.
Got one more for you from at Russell the Rugby. He says, and I think that this may be a tough question for you, to be fair, because I know that you've only been in Australia for a couple of years, but how has the game changed in Australia over the past 10 years on a numerical and statistical level? How long have you been following the Aussie rugby, Brendon, and have you seen any obvious changes statistically?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't been measuring Australia only from the 2019 World Cup. And kind of the reason that got me excited about it was that Australia at that stage, I don't know if you guys can remember during the World Cup, but they attacked from their own 22 like demons. You had this run at all cost, Malarkey, Karevi running, but they got really good at it. And they were efficiency-wise out of their own 22 and own 50 by far the most efficient team in the World Cup because they had the balls to run it, which is something the Crusaders and the All Blacks also do, and Leinster and all these successful teams. So that was exciting. It's just that must be old Cheika's personality that it's all or nothing, and that he didn't have an off switch for that particular strategy. That got me excited, but then, obviously from that point on, I started measuring the Australian game, and then coming over here, the first thing I did was look at the schools rugby and the club rugby to understand what's going on. So the thing about Australian rugby that's very different to other countries, or especially the ones that I've measured, is that in our own 50 meter, we run the ball. That's what we do. We will pass the ball 412 phases if we have to. But there's a law against, or what I've learned now, it's un-Australian to kick out of your own 50. It just nails us time and time again, especially where world rugby is at the moment with regards to attacking ruck. So if the attacking team, every single ruck you play is risky. Because attacking teams are being policed a lot. So as soon as you go off your feet, they only see that attacking team because you're kind of flying into contact, or your body position is already kind of low as you try to clear. Whereas the jackler gets a bit of a free rein. He gets to stand with his head in the middle of the ruck, and if you run into him, it's a red card against you. So attack has become risky, and because of that, the Australian way will need to adapt. So we can look at all levels of the game. That is a key issue. But now you have the Rebels just not doing it anymore. They do not play rugby where rugby shouldn't be played. And for that reason, things become a little bit easier. And what I love about the Australian game is it is quite analytical. It's very smart. We have to bat clever because I think traditionally we might not have had the specimens, the athletes that the New Zealanders and South Africans maybe had. So there's always been that intelligence around the game, and that for me, you see, easiest way to spot it is in how quickly we adapt. So you wouldn't have a team play stupid rugby or do the same stupid thing for 5 or 6 games. Whereas in South Africa, I could easily track the Bulls doing a stupid thing for 2 or 3 years. They're not going to change until someone makes a new hit song and they decide, oh yeah, the world is changing. We need to adapt our game a bit. So change happens quickly. And I think the Super Rugby coaches are a smart bunch of people at the moment,
Yep.
and that's going to benefit us immensely moving forward.
Look, Brendon, I've taken a lot out of this. This has been a really good pod. It's been awesome to have you on. For anyone that's watching or not watching this, you should go check this out on YouTube. You've got another post up there comparing the Rebels and the Brumbies, and you flick through a few different teams there, I think, as well, which is awesome to see. But look, where can people come and find you in your Rugbycology stuff? Where can people get involved as well?
Yeah, look, at the moment, we're just scrambling in the last few days to get the database up and running. So
Yep.
what you see on the screen at the moment will be accessible to anyone.
Yep.
So you will be able to pick your level of rugby. So I do a lot of school stuff. We do the women's game. We do club rugby. So whomever uses the platform to score games will be able to have their data on the database, and you will be able to compare any team to any other team. Now, the analytics are quite limited because it's an open platform. I cannot have one guy decide whether a tackle was made or a tackle was not made, because if you have 10 people in a room, there will be no agreement on it. But the things that we measure only has a yes or a no answer. So it's not as if people can get it wrong. Was a try score? Yes. Was a try, scored from a scrum in the opponent 50? Yes. It's fairly straightforward. But the most important thing is that we'll finally be able to compare any team to any other team in any level of rugby. So for me, that's exciting. It's scratching my own itch. I've always just wondered, why are New Zealand good and why are this team crap? And now finally, by tracking this, we'll be able to compare every old team to any other one. So the guys will just have to wait maybe another week, a week and a half. I'll let you guys know on Twitter once it's up and ready. I'll definitely shout it from the rooftops at that stage. And then anyone can score any team on the platform and also compare their teams to all other teams.
Yep.
Yeah, and you mentioned Twitter. You're at Rugbycology. Anywhere else on on social media that people can find you?
There is Rugbycology on Facebook. I don't get to visit it often with all the Trump dramas and all the craziness. I did the wise thing and just stepped away.
Fair enough.
I haven't checked to see how the Meghan Markle malarkey and all that is playing out at the moment. So I try and sidestep all these things. Facebook seems to be a bit aggressive most of the time.
Yep.
But Twitter is where I'm most active. But there is a Rugbycology site on Facebook, and you're welcome to visit that.
Yep. And look, as soon as you put out the comparisons in your website and everything here, the database, we love your stuff. We're going to share it as well. So anybody that's listening, get amongst it. Again, thanks for having you on board, mate. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much to be on here, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, mate. See ya.
Yes.